Welcome to another video from explainingcomputers.com. This time we're going to take a look at this, the XpressReal T3 single board computer. This is the first SBC from Fyde Innovations, the company that publishes FydeOS, and it's been developed in conjunction with Radsa and Realtek. Now, as you might have noticed already from the size of the box, this is a small SBC and it's got a unique form factor. This is not the same size as a Raspberry Pi, it doesn't use the PicoITX form factor we sometimes see, it does its own thing, and it's got a very interesting range of connectivity and other features. And it's a bit like somebody's gone, let's make an SBC, let's start from scratch and decide what we think should be on the board, and that's very refreshing. I get an impression this is going to be one of the most unique new SBCs I've looked at for some time. So let's go and take a closer look. Right, here we have our new SBC, which I purchased for £44.44 plus taxes directly from the Fyde Innovations web store. And this is about $60 or €51.25. And for once, I don't have to tell you about lots of different versions of a board with different amounts of RAM, different onboard flash and other specifications, as just one model of the XpressReal T3 is currently available. And I think for a new SBC, this is a very sensible decision indeed, as unless you're selling as many SBCs as Raspberry Pi, offering lots of different versions of a board is usually not a smart business decision. Oh, and I should note that the board actually arrived not just with this box, it also arrived with this bubble wrap, which allowed this antenna we can see here also to be included. So let's open this up. I think I'll bring in Stanley the knife and hopefully just get into some of the, will that get me into the shrink wrap? Oh, I think that started the shrink wrap off. It's always difficult shrink wrap, isn't it? I've struggled with shrink wrap a lot, don't I, on this channel? But I will get in. But I haven't got in yet. But who knows? Let me have another go with Stanley. 1 hour, I'll get into the board. There we are, look. Oh, it'll now come off. Diddly diddly dum, diddly diddly dee. And hopefully, yes, I can now open up the end of the board. And or the end of the board, end of the box. And yes, we've got in. I've got to a bag. I can cope with a bag. I shouldn't say that, should I? But is it sealed? Well, it's got a little, actually a Radsa sticker on it, hasn't it? But they are the manufacturing partner. But anyway, we will hopefully get in like that. And hopefully soon, yes, we will get there. In the end, we have, if it ever comes out in the bag, yes, we have our new SBC. And oh, I think it's the wrong way up. It's supposed to be that way up, isn't it? That's the top. There we go. And because this board has got such an interesting form factor, I think we should compare it to some other SBCs. And so over here, I've got a Raspberry Pi 4, which has got a Raspberry Pi Model B form factor. I've got a Raspberry Pi Zero, which has got, well, a Raspberry Pi Zero form factor. And I've got a ROC 5B, which has got a PicoITX form factor, which is increasingly common in the world of SBCs. So let's bring in the XpressReal T3, which, as we can see, is different to all of them. I like that. It's a Maverick SBC. It's almost as long as a PicoITX board. It's certainly longer than a Pi, if not quite as deep. And it looks in some ways like a very chunky Raspberry Pi Zero, but with far more extensive connectivity. So, what hardware do we have here? Well, the system on a chip is actually under the board. Here it is, and it's a Realtek RTD1619B. This contains 4 ARM Cortex-A55 cores, clocked at up to 1.7 GHz, together with a 1.6 TOPS NPU and an ARM Mali G57 MP1 GPU. This SoC is commonly used in NAS devices and Android set-top boxes and should be good at video streaming if there's appropriate software support. We shall see. Also under the board we have a wireless module that supports Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.4 and has a connector for the antenna we saw earlier. And there's also a MIPI DSI connector, a display serial interface connector for hooking up an LCD panel. Lastly, there's a mini PCIe slot that can take a 4G LTE module, and which makes use of the associated nano SIM socket. So if a wireless LTE module is fitted in this PCIe connector and a nano SIM is fitted here, this board can have its own cellular wireless connectivity. Returning to the top of the board, let's flick it over like that. We see there are two main chips on the top of the board, and these provide us with 4 GB of low-power DDR4 3200 RAM and 32 GB of onboard eMMC flash storage. We also have a microSD card slot here. We're always going to have one of those on an SBC. And we also have this, which is an M-keyed 2280 M.2 slot, which has got a PCIe 2.0 single lane interface and can take an NVMe SSD. And if we bring in a 2280 SSD like this and just plug it in like that, sadly no screw is provided, but I'm sure I will find one. But with this drive on the board, it is pretty obvious that accommodating a full-size M.2 SSD was a key factor in the design of the XpressReal T3. If we take the drive off again, there we go. We can see that for Maker projects, we have got a 40-pin GPIO connector just here. However, as we can see, all peripheral connectivity is on the opposite long edge. This starts with an RJ45 socket providing gigabit Ethernet, and this is also equipped with passive power over Ethernet support, accepting a 24-volt 1A supply. Next along we have the USB-C connector, which is the other way to power the board, and this requires a 12-volt 2A input. We then get a second Type-C connector, this time USB 3.2 Gen 1, or in other words, what most of us think of as a standard 5 gigabits per second USB 3.0 port. We then have a full-size HDMI 2.1a connector, which is excellent and provides us with up to 4K output at up to 60 frames a second. And then finally, there's a Type-A USB 2 connector, which makes it really easy to plug in things like a standard keyboard or mouse. And so there we have it, the XpressReal T3 single board computer. Fyde Innovations list enterprise kiosks as an intended area of application, and I can also see this board working well for digital signage and remote sensing. The board could also be used to make a very small NAS with the operating system on eMMC and NVMe SSD storage. And I'm personally also very interested in using this hardware as a low-power TV PC running FydeOS, which will provide far more functionality than a smart TV. So let's install that operating system. Right, I've now connected the board up, and if we look underneath, you will see this is included attaching the antenna, and I've also added a heatsink that's probably not needed, but I had one with nothing else to do. And I've also added some standoffs so we can stand the board more easily on the surface. I've also been across to the XpressReal SBC wiki and downloaded FydeOS, which is a version of Chromium OS as runs on Google Chromebooks. And I've used Balena Etcher to image this to a microSD card, which I've got here. So let's put this into the computer, like that, and unlike in most situations with an Arm SBC, this is actually an install media, which will allow us to either try FydeOS or install it on the eMMC. So the setup here is really a bit more like a traditional PC than a typical Arm board. In case you're wondering, the connected power supply is a generic USB-C unit from Amazon that can supply 12 volts at up to 3 amps. So let's come back to the board and turn on the power. There we go, we have a green LED, and we'll now use the magic of filmmaking to speed on through until something exciting happens. And I think I'll treat this as exciting. It's detected our Raspberry Pi keyboard and mouse which are connected, so we'll click on continue. And I now need to select my language. And oh look, we're welcome to FydeOS. So we'll click on Get Started. And as I discussed earlier, here we can either try FydeOS or opt for an install. And I'm going to go for the install. As we can see, we now have the option of full disk installation or full disk installation. It's the only option. There's no multi-boot opportunity because obviously there's no other operating system on this board right now. So we'll just click on Next. And the disk we're going to install on is our eMMC. There's a drop down here, but obviously nothing else in the drop down. Presumably we could install on an NVMe SSD if one was connected, but for now we'll stick obviously with our eMMC and click on Install. And FydeOS is now installing. I do like the way this is presented. It looks like proper computing. And of course, as usual, we'll now speed on through. And there we are, installation is complete. So we now need to shut down the device like that. And now I'm going to remove the power cable, remove the microSD card, put the power back in, and the XpressReal should now boot FydeOS from its eMMC flash storage. And oh look, it has, and once again it's detected our USB mouse and keyboard. So we will continue, and again select our language. And once again we are welcome to FydeOS. And I'll click on Get Started. And we now need to connect to Wi-Fi. And it thinks the clock is behind. It's going to presumably update the clock. We will click to Update Date and Time, and then accept the terms of service. And we now have three options, either to log in using a FydeOS account or using a Google account. And if you're wondering, where is the third option, Chris? It's down here, the option to use a local account. One of the things that's great about FydeOS is that it's a Chromium OS based operating system where you don't have to log in with an online account. And so here I am going to use a local account. And of course it would like me to use an online account, but I'm going to stay with local. And I now have to set up a username and password. There we are. And I apologize for the small fonts on the screen right now. We will sort that later. And for some reason it wants me to log in with a PIN, not a password. I'm going to use the password I've just set up. Why wouldn't I? And then we now have various messages about FydeOS. We can just click on Next here, Getting Started there, Next here. This is a kind of tutorial. And again, Next, and Next again. It's telling us we can change the size of the text display, which I will do later. I think initially I will select a light theme. And there we are, we're ready to go. We can get started. And so here we are on the FydeOS desktop. We have a menu down here for various functions, including settings. We have a launcher over here, including applications, just like in Chrome OS. And so what I'm now going to do is to sort out the scaling so things read better on video, and I'll come back to you after that. Greetings! Here I am back again, and I've made quite a few scaling and other changes, including selecting a nice new desktop background. And indeed, everything is now set up exactly as it will be when I connect this board to my television. The system is nice and stable. It is slightly laggy here and there, as we can see if I bring up the file manager, not disastrously so, and this is because the board doesn't have incredibly powerful CPU cores. But to its benefit, this does mean it uses very little energy. If I bring up a power meter, we let it settle to idle, it's using about 2.5 watts at idle. If we go to a browser, there we are on the Explaining Computers YouTube channel, and we go to YouTube. That's what you want to see, I'm sure. That's certainly what I want to see. It's my use for this board to play streaming media. And we'll go to the, as we can see here, the Christopher Barnett YouTube channel. Again, slight lag loading in, but nothing disastrous. And oh look, there's my most recent video. I hope you've been checking that out. But what I actually want to show you here is my test video, of course. Let's bring that up and do it full screen like that. And make sure we're in HD like that. And bring up stats for nerds. And we got one drop frame, which I'm sure is when the system was settling down, but once the system has settled, 1080p playback is absolutely rock solid. There's no doubt you can use this system for media playback. If we just go to a 4K, some of you want to know about that, let's bring up 4K, And we'll go back to here so we've got enough video to play. See how this does. Just needs to sort itself out. No drop frames here, even better in theory than 1080p. It isn't, of course, it was just a frame settling initially. But again, we're playing back 1080p content. Sorry, we're playing back 4K content with almost no problems. We've got one drop frame now. But certainly 1080p media playback fine on this system. 4K, pretty much fine on this system. Although there is one thing to point out, let's just come out of that for a second, which is that if you want to play DRM protected content in FydeOS, you have to install Widevine, a Google DRM technology. And there is a page about this on the FydeOS website. Let's just bring it up. It is somewhere down here like that. I have covered this in my previous FydeOS videos, but I just thought I'd make you aware of this. If you do want to use Netflix and Disney Plus and things like that on this system, you will have to follow the instructions on this page to install Widevine DRM. Now, in addition to FydeOS and its OpenFyde open source sibling, there are various other operating systems available for the XpressReal T3. And as we can see here in the wiki, these include Home Assistant, they include Armbian, they include Android, and they include various custom Linux images. And if we just take a look here at the custom Linux images, we can see we have both Debian and Ubuntu with and without an XFCE desktop environment. And earlier I did try the desktop version of Ubuntu, which is pretty minimal. It does work, there's not a lot pre-installed. It does seem pretty stable, but right now the implementation is nowhere near the quality of FydeOS. So what we're actually running here, you might have guessed already, is Armbian. And this is in pre-release. Now if I just close down the browser, you can see here we are running Armbian, the universal operating system on the XpressReal T3. And I do want to stress this is a test release, but it is working pretty well. Again, there isn't a lot pre-installed. If we just look at the apps here, I have used a package manager to install Firefox, which we were just running, and there are a few other things installed, as we can see. Well, just to run up HTOP, because some of you like to see HTOP, there it is doing its HTOP thing. We have got a 720-ish megabytes of memory to use out of our 4 gigabytes. There we are, that's your fill of HTOP if you wanted that. Although what I want to do, you can probably guess, is to have a look in the terminal and do a bit of storage testing, because guess what? I have fitted an NVMe SSD to the system. I found a screw, and so we can test this as well as the speed of the internal eMMC and the microSD card from which we're currently running Armbian. So let's do an LSBLK, list block devices. Quite a lot on this system. We can see at the top MMC BLK0, that is the internal eMMC flash storage. We then have MMC BLK1, that is our microSD card, and down here we've got our NVMe SSD. So let's do a bit of speed testing. We'll start, I think, with the microSD card. Let's see how that fares. Here we go. It wants my password. Something like that, I hope. Looks like it is. What is this going to be? I know what it's going to be. I've run a test already. So I'm not surprised to find we've got a speed of 83.3 megabytes a second for the microSD card. That's pretty good on an Arm SBC. So let's now also do the speed of the eMMC, like that. Not currently being used. It's still got FydeOS on it, but not currently booted, fairly obviously, because we're running Armbian. And oh look, 275.5 megabytes a second. We have got some very decent eMMC flash storage on this board. And finally, let's do the speed of the NVMe SSD connected via the board's single lane PCIe 2.0 interface. Let's see what we get. Here we go. Very exciting. And it's going to be, come on, there we are, 399.74 megabytes a second. And so overall, I'm pretty impressed with the storage speeds on this low power Arm SBC. The XpressReal T3 is a really nice SBC, especially running FydeOS from its internal eMMC. And if you're wondering, with FydeOS installed, the eMMC is about half full with 15.9 gigabytes free. Now, you may also be wondering about running an operating system from an NVMe drive. And right now, although it's possible to install FydeOS on an NVMe SSD, I have tried this, it's not bootable. However, I've checked with Fyde Innovations, who've told me that, whilst there isn't a working U-boot driver for PCIe at the moment, they are currently writing one. And so booting the XpressReal T3 from an NVMe SSD should be possible in the future. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And I hope to talk to you again very soon.